You know, doing your own vehicle repairs is easy with the help of Car Care Seminar. Hi, I'm Scott Cusey, and I'll be your narrator and host as we take a look at repairing the cooling system on your vehicle. Now, you know, doing your own cooling system maintenance and repairs can really give you several different benefits. Number one, you can save yourself some money. Number two, you gain the satisfaction of doing the job yourself. And number three, maintaining and doing your own cooling system repairs can prevent unexpected roadside failures. Now, during this chapter, we're going to take a look at the different repairs we'll be viewing on this tape, and we'll also take a look at the tools and specialty items and some tips to help you throughout the duration of the tape. In Chapter 2, we'll take a look at how easy it is to replace your thermostat. In Chapter 3, we'll demonstrate a typical water pump replacement. In Chapter 4, we'll take a look at not only inspecting, but also how to replace a fan clutch. In Chapter 5, we'll take a look at installing an auxiliary electric fan, which is quite similar to actually replacing the existing electric fan on today's front-wheel drive vehicles. And in Chapter 6, we'll take a look at a typical heater core replacement. Well, that pretty much wraps up the repairs that we'll be demonstrating on this tape. Now let's spend just a couple of moments talking about some of the tools, and I'll give you a couple tips to help you out when you're doing your own cooling system repairs. First off, everyone knows that you're going to need a basic set of hand tools. Now, basic set of hand tools is going to include many of the items that we have right back here. Pliers, screwdrivers, wrenches, and you're also going to probably need a pretty decent sized socket set that might include 1/4-inch drive and 3/8 drive sockets in maybe metric and standard depending on the type of vehicle that you're working on. Now, in addition to that, I got a couple items down here that I'd like to talk about. First off, a wooden pry bar. Kind of a neat item to have around when you're replacing belts on your cooling system because you can use the pry bar to help you tighten up the belt. But don't get too carried away with the pry bar either because you can over-tighten belts and then damage cooling system components. So take it easy when you're tightening belts, but this is an item that's kind of nice to have around, and even an old wooden handle from a broom or something works fine. Now, when it comes to gasket scrapers, I like to have a gasket scraper that has a little bit of flexibility in it, like this one does here. And the reason I like to have one like that is just because of the fact that when you're scraping gaskets off of many of today's newer vehicles, you're scraping them off from an aluminum surface. If you've got a flexible scraper like this here, there's a lot less chance of gouging the aluminum surface when you're cleaning the gasket off. Another little handy item to have around is just a little piece of sandpaper because a lot of times there's some old sealer or something like that left on the surface you want to clean off, or maybe even a radiator neck when you're replacing a hose. This will clean off that corrosion and some of the extra gasket material too. Pretty much everybody has something like that. Now, when it comes to pinching off hoses, here's a tip that I like to use. I like to take a locking vice grip pliers like this, slide a couple of old pieces of fuel hose over it, and then if I'm clamping off a hose, whether it's a fuel hose or it's a heater hose or anything like that, you can clamp it down like that, shut it off, and especially in the case that you're replacing a heater core and you just need to clamp those hoses off so it doesn't leak all over the place, it's a neat way to do it. So you don't damage the hose that way and you don't have to buy an expensive tool. Now, when it comes to removing hoses, especially in the area of heater cores, one of the things that I always like to make sure I'm doing, and if I'm going to replace a hose for sure, is if the hose is tight and you can't get it off, here's a tip. Just take a little cutter knife like this here and put a little slice in the hose itself. Once you've got that little slice in the hose will just gently slip off the fitting. And that'll protect radiator fittings, heater core fittings, and even heater valve fittings, things like that, that you want to make sure that you don't damage just to replace a hose. So kind of a little tip to keep in mind when you are replacing hoses. When it comes to gasket sealers, a lot of people like to use a silicone type of sealer for doing cooling system repairs. A couple of quick points. If the vehicle is prior to 1980, a sealer like this one will work just fine. If it's later than 1980, computerized vehicle with an oxygen sensor, you're going to want an oxygen sensor safe or non-volatile type of silicone sealer like this here. So just make sure you take a look at the package. If it says sensor safe, you can use it on today's computerized vehicles. Lastly, a drain pan. Kind of a simple item, but it can't be overlooked either. You want to make sure that you've got a drain pan, so when you're doing a cooling system repair, you can drain the radiator down and either reuse the coolant or recycle the coolant if at all possible. Well, that pretty much wraps up the specialty tools. There really isn't that much that you'll need for doing your own cooling system repairs. Right now, I'd like to take just a moment to congratulate you for taking the first step on your way towards doing your own automotive repairs successfully. I'm Scott Cusey for Car Care Seminar, and let's get started with our first repair.
The items you'll need to replace your thermostat are a screwdriver and a wrench or socket set, a gasket scraper, some silicone or non-hardening gasket sealer, a new thermostat, a gasket, a drain pan or bucket, and some antifreeze or coolant. The first step is to drain the radiator coolant so the level is below that of the thermostat. To do so, remove the radiator cap and locate and loosen the drain cock to drain the coolant into a pan or bucket. The radiator drain is usually located in the lower tank section of the radiator. Word of caution, never remove any part of the cooling system when the engine is hot. Always service the cooling system when the engine is cool. If your vehicle does not have a radiator drain, the lower radiator hose will have to be disconnected to drain the coolant. Next, remove the bolts from the thermostat housing. A light tap on the housing with a rubber hammer will help break loose the old gasket or sealer. Although not necessary, you may wish to disconnect the thermostat housing from the upper radiator hose for ease of cleaning. With the housing removed from the engine, remove the old thermostat. Note the direction the old thermostat is pointed for reference during reassembly. With the gasket scraper, clean the old gasket or sealer from the thermostat housing and its mounting surface. For a good seal, it's important to have a clean and dry surface for the new gasket and sealer. Make sure the groove in the manifold or housing where the thermostat sits is clean and free of corrosion. Position the new thermostat in the housing or in the manifold as your application requires. Make sure the thermostat is positioned in the same direction as the old one was before it was removed. Coat both sides of the gasket with a light coat of gasket sealer and place the gasket over the new thermostat and hold it in place for a few seconds before installing it on the engine. This will help ensure that the thermostat will not slip out of place during installation. If the thermostat is allowed to move out of place, a leak could result, or you could crack the thermostat housing during tightening. Apply a light dab of sealer to the bolts and reinstall them. A general rule of thumb is 12 to 15 foot-pounds of torque on the thermostat housing bolts. Over-tightening these bolts may damage the bolts and their mounting surface. Reattach the upper radiator hose if you've previously removed it, and refill the radiator to the proper level. Make sure the radiator drain is tightened before refilling the radiator. Now start the engine and allow it to reach normal operating temperature. Check for leaks around the hoses in the housing while the engine is running.
Let's review replacing a thermostat. First, drain the engine coolant to a level below the thermostat. Remove the thermostat housing bolts. Lift the thermostat housing off the engine. Clean the gasket surface on the thermostat housing and the engine. Place a new thermostat into the engine, making sure it is facing the same direction as the old one. Install a new gasket over the thermostat. With a light dab of sealer on the mounting bolt, reinstall the thermostat housing. Refill the radiator with a 50-50 mixture of antifreeze and water. Finally, allow the engine to reach operating temperatures and check for leaks.
The items you will need are a socket and wrench set,